Have you ever stood before a casket, tears streaming down your face, and felt completely lost about how to truly help the soul of your beloved who has just departed this world? The death of someone close to you strikes like lightning, leaving you desperate to do something, anything, to ease their journey into eternity. But here's a truth that might shake you. There's a hidden error that almost everyone makes when praying for the deceased. And this mistake, according to the great mystic and doctor of the Church, Saint Teresa of Jesus, can actually harm the very souls we're trying to help. Subscribe to this channel to receive more teachings and counsel from Saint Teresa. You might think that saying they're already in heaven or God will take care of everything shows faith and love. But Saint Teresa, who penetrated the deepest mysteries of spiritual life, warns us that there's something far more dangerous lurking beneath these seemingly pious words. This error doesn't come with warning signs or dramatic revelations. It creeps into our prayers like a silent poison, blocking the very grace we want to channel toward our departed loved ones. Have you ever noticed how quickly people rush to comfort grieving families by declaring the deceased is already with the angels? This premature certainty, while well-intentioned, might be one of the cruelest mistakes we can make. The weight of this truth should make you pause and examine your own heart. When your grandmother passed away last month, when your friend died in that accident, when your spouse took their final breath, what did you really pray? Did you offer genuine intercession, or did you simply assume they were beyond the need for your help? Saint Teresa discovered through years of mystical experience and deep theological understanding that our presumptions about the dead can either accelerate their purification or leave them abandoned in their most desperate hour of need. The Catechism teaches clearly that from the earliest times the Church has honored the memory of the dead and offered prayers in their favor, particularly the Eucharistic sacrifice, so that, thus purified, they may attain the beatific vision of God. This is not about fear or superstition. This is about love in its most practical and powerful form. Tonight, as you lie in bed, thinking about those you've lost, you need to understand that your prayers, your sacrifices, your masses offered for them have real spiritual power. But only if you avoid the trap that catches almost everyone, the trap of presuming too much or despairing too much. Saint Teresa calls this the battlefield of the soul, where the enemy of souls works hardest to convince us that our intercession is either unnecessary or useless. Are you ready to discover what true spiritual charity toward the dead really looks like? Picture yourself at a funeral, surrounded by well-meaning voices declaring with absolute certainty, "Don't worry, he's in a better place now. She's already an angel watching over us. He's definitely in paradise." These words feel comforting, don't they? They seem to wrap grief in hope and transform sorrow into celebration. But Saint Teresa of Jesus, who spent her life navigating the depths of spiritual truth, would have seen through this false comfort immediately. This presumption, this rush to declare souls already glorified, represents one of the most subtle yet devastating errors we make when confronting death. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what if your premature certainty is actually abandoning a soul in their hour of greatest need? The doctrine of purgatory exists precisely because divine justice and divine mercy work together in perfect harmony. Most souls, even good and faithful souls, need purification before entering the presence of the all-holy God. When you declare with absolute certainty that your deceased father is already in heaven, you're not showing faith, you're showing presumption. And presumption, according to Catholic teaching, is a sin against hope. It assumes God's mercy without acknowledging His justice, and it practically abandons souls who desperately need your prayers, your sacrifices, your masses. Saint Teresa understood this with crystalline clarity. What we think causes no harm often causes us the greatest harm. Your hasty declarations might be causing spiritual harm to the very souls you love most. Think about the profound selfishness hidden in presumption. When you immediately assume your loved one needs no further help from you, you're actually relieving yourself of the beautiful burden of ongoing spiritual charity. You're cutting short the most loving relationship possible between the living and the dead, the relationship of prayer, sacrifice, and suffrages. Saint Teresa would tell you that true love doesn't end at the grave. It transforms into something more powerful and more necessary than ever before. The souls in purgatory are completely dependent on our prayers and sacrifices. unable to help themselves, burning with desire for God while being purified of every trace of sin and imperfection. Can you imagine the anguish of a soul in purgatory, sensing that their family has stopped praying for them because everyone assumes they're already in perfect bliss? This is not about creating fear, but about understanding the weight of spiritual responsibility. When Saint Teresa's own father died, she didn't presume his immediate salvation despite his virtue. She offered prayers, penances, and masses for his soul. This is the path of humility and genuine love. Tonight, examine your conscience. Have you abandoned any souls through your presumptions? Have you stopped the very prayers that could accelerate their journey to eternal joy because you assumed they no longer needed your help? But there's another error equally dangerous, equally devastating, that can poison your prayers for the dead: the poison of despair. Have you ever heard someone say at a funeral, "I don't know if he made it," or "She lived such a troubled life, I fear the worst," or "After all those mistakes, how could God forgive him?" This despair about the eternal fate of our loved ones doesn't come from humility. It comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of God's infinite mercy. Saint Teresa of Jesus, who experienced both the depths of human weakness and the heights of divine compassion, would recognize this despair as another trap set by the enemy of souls, designed to paralyze your prayer and render your intercession powerless. When despair enters your heart as you think about the dead, it doesn't motivate you to pray more fervently. It convinces you that prayer is useless. "What's the point?" whispers that voice of darkness. "If he's already lost, why waste time on prayers? If she's already condemned, why offer masses?" This despair masquerades as realism, as honest assessment of someone's spiritual state, but it's actually a profound insult to God's mercy. Saint Teresa understood that God's mercy is so vast, so incomprehensible, that human minds cannot fathom its depths. She wrote, "Let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you. God does not change. Patience obtains everything." This patience includes patient hope in God's mercy even for those who seemed most distant from Him in life. The truth that should set your heart ablaze with hope is this: you don't know the final spiritual state of any soul. You don't know what grace, what moment of repentance, what encounter with divine mercy might have occurred in those final moments of life. The Church teaches that God desires the salvation of all souls and provides grace sufficient for salvation to everyone. Saint Teresa knew that many souls who appeared lost to human eyes were actually saved by God's secret grace. Your uncle who rarely went to church, your friend who struggled with addiction, your relative who seemed to reject faith, none of them are beyond the reach of divine mercy, and none of them are beyond the power of your prayers to help. This is where the spiritual battle becomes most intense. The devil wants you to either presume salvation and stop praying, or despair of salvation and stop praying. Both roads lead to the same destination, the abandonment of souls through the cessation of prayer. But Saint Teresa discovered the narrow path between presumption and despair, confident hope combined with humble intercession. Tonight, if you've been carrying despair about any departed soul, let it go. Replace it with this prayer: Lord, I trust in your infinite mercy. I offer prayers for this soul, confident that you desire their salvation more than I do. Write in the comments, I trust in God's infinite mercy, and subscribe to receive more spiritual guidance. In the silence of her cell at the Incarnation Monastery, Saint Teresa of Jesus learned something that would transform how she understood prayer for the living and the dead. She discovered that the devil's most successful attacks don't come through dramatic temptations or obvious sins, but through subtle deceptions that appear righteous and even holy. "What we think causes no harm," she wrote, "often causes us the greatest harm." This wisdom applies with devastating accuracy to how we pray for the deceased. The devil doesn't need to convince you to stop praying entirely. He only needs to corrupt your prayers with presumption or despair, rendering them spiritually ineffective and leaving souls abandoned in their need. Saint Teresa understood that spiritual vigilance, the constant, loving attention to the movements of grace and deception within the soul, was not optional but essential for authentic spiritual life. When it comes to praying for the dead, this vigilance means examining not just whether you pray, but how you pray, why you pray, and what attitudes you bring to your prayer. Are you approaching the deceased with the humility that acknowledges your ignorance of their spiritual state? Are you maintaining hope while avoiding presumption? Are you persevering in prayer even when you see no visible results? This kind of vigilance requires what Teresa called awakeness in God, a constant awareness of God's presence and action that doesn't depend on emotions or external circumstances. The mystic saint discovered that the devil particularly attacks our prayer for the dead because these prayers are acts of pure charity. The souls in purgatory cannot repay our kindness, cannot thank us, cannot benefit us in any material way. This makes such prayers especially precious to God and especially threatening to Satan. He will whisper that your prayers don't matter, that the souls don't need your help, that God has already decided everything. He'll convince you that offering one Mass is enough, that saying one rosary fulfills your obligation, that surely after a few months or years, continued prayer becomes unnecessary. Saint Teresa would warn you, these are the very thoughts that should make you pray more, not less. But Teresa's vigilance wasn't rooted in fear or anxiety. It was rooted in love. She maintained constant spiritual attention because she understood that every soul is precious beyond measure to God, and every prayer offered in genuine love has real power to help souls in their purification. Tonight, as you examine your own prayer life for the deceased, ask yourself, have you been vigilant about the quality and consistency of your intercession? Have you noticed subtle temptations to stop praying or to pray mechanically without real care? Have you been alert to the devil's attempts to discourage your spiritual charity toward the dead? This vigilance, exercised with love rather than fear, will transform your prayers from routine obligations into powerful acts of mercy. Saint Teresa of Jesus once declared, "Prayer is the weapon with which we can conquer everything." But what did she mean by prayer when it comes to helping the souls of the dead? Not the mechanical recitation of familiar words, not the quick petitions offered out of duty, but the kind of prayer that sets the heart on fire with love for God and genuine concern for souls in need. This is the prayer that pierces through the veil between earth and purgatory, carrying grace like rays of light that accelerate the purification of souls and bring them closer to the beatific vision. Have you ever prayed for the dead with this kind of intensity, this kind of confident expectation that your prayer has real power? The power of persevering prayer lies not in its length or complexity, but in its faithfulness and love. When you offer a rosary for your departed grandmother, understanding that each Hail Mary is a plea for God's mercy to fall upon her soul, you're participating in something magnificent and mysterious. Your prayer unites with the prayer of the entire Church, the prayer of all the saints, the prayer of Christ himself, and becomes part of an immense spiritual force working for the salvation and purification of souls. Saint Teresa understood that every single prayer offered with genuine love reaches the heart of God and becomes a source of grace for the souls who need it most. This is why she insisted on perseverance, not because God is reluctant to help, but because consistent prayer demonstrates genuine love and concern. But here's what most people don't understand about praying for the dead. You're not trying to change God's mind or convince him to be merciful. God's mercy is infinite and constant. What your prayers do is create channels through which that infinite mercy can flow to souls in purgatory. Think of it this way. God has already decided to help every soul reach heaven, but he has chosen to work through the prayers and sacrifices of the living. Your persevering prayer for the dead is actually your participation in God's own plan of salvation. When you faithfully offer masses, rosaries, penances, and acts of charity for deceased souls, you become an instrument of divine mercy, a collaborator in the great work of salvation. Saint Teresa discovered that the fruit of persevering prayer wasn't just the help it provided to souls in purgatory. It was also the transformation it worked in her own soul. When you commit to praying consistently for the dead, something beautiful happens within you. You develop a deeper understanding of the communion of saints, a greater awareness of eternal realities, a more profound appreciation for God's mercy. You begin to see death not as an ending, but as a transition, not as separation, but as a call to deeper spiritual communion. Tonight, choose one departed soul who has been on your heart and commit to praying for them every day for the next month. Don't just pray once and forget. Persevere, persist. Keep offering your love through prayer until you sense in your heart that your intercession is no longer needed. If Saint Teresa of Jesus were sitting beside you right now, she would look into your eyes with the intensity that only comes from someone who has touched the deepest mysteries of God, and tell you this truth: there is no prayer more powerful for the souls of the dead than the holy sacrifice of the Mass. The Council of Trent declared with solemn authority that the Mass is the most efficacious suffrage for the souls in purgatory, and Teresa knew from her own mystical experience that when Christ becomes present on the altar, heaven and earth unite in a way that unleashes infinite grace upon the souls who need it most. Have you ever truly grasped the magnitude of what happens when you have a Mass offered for someone who has died? When you request a Mass for a deceased loved one, you're not just asking for prayers, you're asking for Christ himself to offer his sacrifice on Calvary again, making it present on the altar for the specific intention of helping that soul. The priest's words of consecration don't just remember Christ's death. They make it mystically present, with all its infinite power to cleanse, to heal, to purify. Saint Teresa understood that at every Mass, Christ offers himself to the Father with the same love, the same desire for souls, the same infinite value that marked his original sacrifice on the cross. When that sacrifice is applied to a soul in purgatory, it's like a torrent of purifying grace washing over them, accelerating their journey toward the beatific vision. But here's what you need to understand about offering Masses for the dead. It's not about the money you give to the priest, it's about the love and intention you bring to this sacred action. When you arrange for a Mass to be offered for your deceased father, you should participate in that Mass with your whole heart, uniting your prayer to the infinite prayer of Christ, offering yourself along with the sacred host for the salvation of his soul. Saint Teresa would tell you that your spiritual participation in the Mass multiplies its effectiveness for the soul you're praying for. This is why she insisted that there is no prayer more powerful than that of the Church in the liturgy. The tragedy is how few people really understand or use this incredible spiritual treasure. How many Masses could you have offered for your deceased relatives instead of spending money on elaborate flowers or expensive monuments that provide no spiritual benefit to souls? How many opportunities have you missed to give your departed loved ones the greatest gift possible, the application of Christ's infinite merits through the holy sacrifice? Saint Teresa practiced what she preached. She regularly had Masses offered for souls in need, understanding that this was the most concrete and powerful way to express love for the dead. Tonight, make a commitment. Have a Mass offered this week for someone who has died. Participate in that Mass with all your heart and experience the profound joy of knowing you've given a soul the greatest possible help on their journey to God. The words you speak about the dead matter more than you realize. Saint Teresa of Jesus, with her deep understanding of spiritual realities, knew that our words can either support souls in their purification or abandon them through careless presumption. When you stand at a funeral and hear people declare with absolute certainty, "She's already in heaven," or "He's looking down on us as an angel," something inside you might feel comforted. But Teresa would gently challenge you to examine whether these words come from genuine faith or from an unconscious desire to avoid the difficult work of continued prayer and sacrifice. What if there's a better way to speak about the dead? A way that combines hope with humility, comfort with spiritual responsibility. The path Teresa discovered runs like a narrow bridge between two dangerous cliffs, the cliff of presumption and the cliff of despair. Instead of declaring souls already saved or already lost, she found words that expressed confident hope while acknowledging the mystery of God's justice and mercy. When someone asked her about a deceased person, she might say, "Let us trust in God's infinite mercy and continue praying for his soul," or "We hope in the Lord's goodness while offering our prayers for her eternal rest." These words accomplish something beautiful. They comfort the grieving while keeping alive the spiritual connection between the living and the dead through continued prayer. Listen to how different these humble words feel compared to premature declarations of salvation. When you say, "We trust in God's mercy and pray for her soul," you're creating space for hope without closing the door on continued intercession. You're acknowledging that God's ways are higher than our ways while maintaining confidence in his goodness. You're comforting the grieving without abandoning the deceased. Saint Teresa understood that this kind of language reflects genuine spiritual maturity, the ability to hold both hope and humility in perfect balance, neither presuming on God's judgment nor despairing of his mercy. This balanced approach to speaking about the dead transforms your entire relationship with death and dying. Instead of treating funerals as celebrations of certain salvation, you begin to see them as commissioning services, moments when the community commits to accompanying souls through prayer and sacrifice until they reach their eternal destination. Instead of memorial services that focus only on earthly memories, you participate in liturgies that unite heaven and earth in prayer for the dead. Tonight, practice speaking about deceased loved ones with this new vocabulary of hope and humility. Notice how these words keep your heart open to continued prayer rather than closing it with false certainty. This is the language of the saints, the language of genuine love. Saint Teresa of Jesus lived in a world where love was measured not by feelings or words, but by concrete actions that cost something real. When it came to helping souls in purgatory, she didn't content herself with pious thoughts or sentimental prayers. She offered genuine sacrifices, real penances, and actual deprivation of her own comfort for the sake of souls who could not help themselves. This is the dimension of prayer for the dead that modern Christians often miss entirely. The power of joining personal sacrifice to prayer, creating what the Church calls satisfactory works that can be applied to souls in need. Are you ready to move beyond comfortable prayers to sacrificial love? Think about what genuine love looks like when someone you care about is suffering. You don't just feel sorry for them, you do something. You give up your time, your resources, your comfort to help them. The same principle applies to souls in purgatory, except their need is infinitely greater and your ability to help is infinitely more powerful than any earthly assistance you could provide. When you fast and offer that hunger for a deceased soul, when you give alms and dedicate that charity to someone in purgatory, when you accept suffering patiently and unite it to Christ's passion for the dead, you're providing real spiritual assistance that accelerates their purification and brings them closer to God. Saint Teresa discovered that these acts of sacrifice, when offered with love and united to Christ's merits, have extraordinary power to help souls. She would fast on bread and water for souls in need. She would accept the discomfort of her reformed Carmelite lifestyle and offer every small suffering for the purification of the dead. She would give away what little money came to her monastery, dedicating those acts of charity to souls who could no longer perform works of mercy for themselves. This wasn't masochism or extremism. This was love in action, love that costs something real, love that mirrors Christ's own sacrificial love for souls. The beauty of this approach is that it transforms every aspect of your daily life into potential help for the dead. The inconvenience of traffic becomes an offering for your deceased grandmother when you accept it patiently instead of complaining. The money you choose not to spend on unnecessary luxuries becomes alms for souls in purgatory when you give it to charity in their name. The headache you endure without complaint becomes a small participation in Christ's passion when you offer it for the souls who need purification. Tonight, choose one small sacrifice you can make tomorrow, perhaps giving up dessert, or accepting an annoying situation without complaining, or giving money you would have spent on yourself to someone in need, and offer it specifically for a soul who has died. This is concrete love, the love that Teresa practiced, and that truly helps souls on their journey to God. In the depths of prayer, Saint Teresa of Jesus discovered something that should make every Christian tremble with holy determination. There is a fierce spiritual battle being waged over every soul that dies, and the outcome of that battle can be influenced by the prayers, sacrifices, and masses offered by the living. The devil doesn't stop his attacks when someone dies. If anything, he intensifies his efforts to discourage intercession for souls in purgatory, knowing that abandoned souls take longer to reach the purification necessary for heaven. Have you ever wondered why you feel such resistance when you try to pray consistently for the dead? Or why thoughts arise telling you that your prayers don't matter? This spiritual warfare explains so much about the strange reluctance people feel when it comes to sustained prayer for the deceased. You decide to offer a daily rosary for your deceased mother, and suddenly you find yourself forgetting, or feeling like it's pointless, or being convinced that surely she doesn't need your help anymore. These aren't just natural thoughts. They're strategic attacks designed to cut off the spiritual lifeline between you and souls who desperately need your intercession. Saint Teresa understood that the devil's goal is simple: convince the living to stop praying for the dead, leaving souls in purgatory with less assistance and slower purification. But here's the weapon Teresa discovered that defeats these attacks: the recognition that resistance to prayer is actually a sign that prayer is needed and effective. When you feel discouraged about praying for the dead, when thoughts arise telling you it's useless, when you encounter obstacles to offering masses or making sacrifices for deceased souls, these are actually signs that you're engaged in something spiritually powerful that the enemy wants to stop. Instead of being discouraged by resistance, let it motivate you to pray more, sacrifice more, and trust more deeply in the value of your intercession. The victory in this spiritual battle comes through perseverance, combined with confidence in God's power. Saint Teresa learned to see every obstacle to prayer as confirmation that prayer was necessary, every discouragement as proof that spiritual work was happening, every attempt to make her forget the dead as evidence that remembering them was vitally important. When you understand that souls in purgatory are counting on your prayers, that your spiritual warfare on their behalf can make the difference between longer or shorter purification, you begin to approach prayer for the dead with the seriousness it deserves. Tonight, if you've been experiencing resistance to praying for deceased loved ones, recognize it for what it is: spiritual opposition that proves your prayers have real power. Don't let the enemy win through discouragement. Double your efforts and watch how God honors your faithful love. As Saint Teresa of Jesus approached the end of her earthly life, she carried within her heart a truth that transformed every moment. Death is not separation, but deeper communion, not ending but beginning, not loss but transformation into a more powerful form of love. She understood that when we pray faithfully for the dead, offer masses for their souls, and sacrifice for their purification, we're not just helping them, we're building eternal relationships that will flourish in heaven for all eternity. The souls you help reach God through your prayers and sacrifices will be forever grateful, forever connected to you in the communion of saints, forever part of your spiritual family in ways that transcend anything possible on earth. This vision of eternal communion should set your heart on fire with motivation to pour out your love for deceased souls through concrete spiritual assistance. Every Mass you have offered for the dead, every rosary you've prayed for souls in purgatory, every sacrifice you've made for their purification is creating bonds of spiritual friendship that will bring you joy throughout eternity. The grandmother whose soul you helped through patient prayer, the friend whose purification you accelerated through generous sacrifices, the stranger whose name you never knew but whose soul you assisted through faithful masses. All of these will greet you in heaven with gratitude that surpasses earthly understanding. You're not just helping souls reach God, you're investing in your own eternal happiness, but the promise extends even further than personal joy. When you dedicate yourself to helping souls in purgatory, you become part of the Church's most beautiful and powerful work, the circulation of grace throughout the mystical body of Christ. Your prayers rise to heaven, bringing help to souls in need. Those souls, once purified and in heaven, pray for you with perfect love and powerful intercession. The saints in heaven join their prayers to yours, creating an inexhaustible fountain of grace that blesses the entire Church. This is the communion of saints in action, the living helping the dead praying for the living, the saints interceding for all, and God blessing every act of love with infinite generosity. Tonight, as you prepare to implement everything you've learned about praying for the dead, remember that you're not just performing religious duties or following pious customs. You're participating in the most fundamental reality of Christian life, the victory of love over death, the triumph of communion over separation, the power of grace to unite heaven and earth through sacrifice offered in faith. Make this commitment. Choose 3 deceased souls who have been on your heart and dedicate the next month to intensive prayer and sacrifice for their eternal rest. Have masses offered for them. Pray the rosary daily for their purification. Make small sacrifices throughout each day and unite them to Christ's passion for their sake. Trust in the infinite mercy of God, persevere through any resistance or discouragement, and prepare yourself for the eternal joy of reunion with souls whose journey to God you helped through genuine love. As Saint Teresa promised, no prayer is ever lost. Every word pronounced with faith reaches the heart